Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club Spiritual Edition. And today we're going to continue our reading of Flow by Mihaly C. Mr. C. I call him Mr. C because I don't know how to pronounce his last name. So, this book was inspired by an animated film that I saw with the same name, Flow. I don't think they have any association with each other, but I'll leave the website of the animated film in the description box below. You guys can check it out. It's worth watching. Um, it's very well done. That's what uh, I enjoyed it a lot. And I think it won an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. So congratulations. And yeah, I think it's streaming right now. I don't think it's in the theaters anymore, but you guys can check it out nonetheless and watch it if you have a chance. So today we are going to be reading chapter 8. This is part 2, and I'm going to move the camera in a little bit so you guys can read. Oops, oops, oops. Okay, if you have a book, you can follow with us in your book, or you can follow with us here. And there are certain aspects that I have highlighted, like here. That means there is a footnote in the back of the book, and we will be reading that as well. Okay. All right, here we go. Taming solitude. Every rule has its exceptions. Even though most people dread solitude, there are some individuals who live alone by choice. Whosoever is delighted in solitude, goes the old saying that Francis Bacon repeated, is either a wild beast or a god. It's funny. One does not actually have to be a god, but it is true that to enjoy being alone, a person must build his own mental routines so that he can achieve flow without the supports of civilized life, without other people, without jobs, TV, theaters, restaurants, or libraries to help channel his attention. One interesting example of this type of person is a woman named Dorothy, who lives on a tiny island in the lonely region of lakes and forests of northern Minnesota along the Canadian border. Originally a nurse in a large city, Dorothy moved up to the wilderness after her husband died and their children grew up. During the 3 summer months, fishermen canoeing across her lake stop at the island to have a chat. But during the long winters, she is completely alone for months on end. Dorothy has had to hang heavy drapes on the windows of her cabin because it used to unnerve her to see packs of wolves, their noses flattened against the window panes, looking at her longingly when she woke up in the mornings. Oh, they wanted company. The wolves wanted company. Oh. Like other people who live alone in the wilderness, Dorothy has tried to personalize her surroundings to an uncommon degree. There are flower tubs, garden gnomes, discarded tools all over the grounds. Most trees have signs nailed to them filled with doggerel rhymes, corny jokes, or horror cartoons pointing to the shed and outhouses. To an urban visitor, the island is the epitome of kitsch. What's that? I gotta look it up. But as extensions of Dorothy's taste, this junk creates a familiar environment where her mind can be at ease. In the midst of untamed nature, she has introduced her own idiosyncratic style, her own civilization. Inside, her favorite objects recall Dorothy's goals. She has stamped her preferences on chaos. More important than structuring space, perhaps, is structuring time. Dorothy has strict routines for every day of the year. Up by 5, check the hens for eggs, milk the goat, split some wood, make breakfast, wash, sew, fish, and so on. Like the colonial Englishman uh, who shaved, who shaved, okay, sorry about that, who shaved and dressed impeccably every evening in their lonely outposts. Dorothy also has learned that to keep control in an alien environment, one must impose one's own order on the wilderness. The long evenings are taken up by reading and writing. Books on every imaginable subject line the walls of her two cabins. Then there are the occasional trips for supplies, and in the summer, some variety is introduced by the visits of fishermen passing through. Dorothy seems to like people, but she likes being in control of her own world even more. All right, let's read about the footnote for Dorothy. Ah, very short. The description of Dorothy's lifestyle is based on personal experience. Ah, description of Dorothy's lifestyle is based on Dorothy's personal experience or the author's personal experience. Hmm, that wasn't very clear. Okay, moving on. One can survive solitude, but only if one finds ways of ordering attention that will prevent entropy from destructuring the mind. Susan Butcher, the dog breeder and trainer who races sleds in the Arctic for up to 11 days on end while trying to elude the attacks of rogue moose and wolves, moved years ago from Massachusetts to live in a cabin 25 miles from the nearest village of Mandy, Alaska, population 62. Before her marriage, she lived alone with her husband and 50 huskies. She doesn't have time to feel lonely, hunting for food and caring for her dogs, who require her attention 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. Prevent that. She knows each dog by name and the name of each dog's parents and grandparents. She knows, oh, sorry, a little crooked there. She knows their temperaments, preferences, eating habits, and current health. Susan claims she would rather live this way than do anything else. The routine she has built demand that her consciousness be focused on manageable tasks all of the time, thereby making life a continuous flow experience. A friend who likes to cross oceans alone on a sailboat once told an anecdote that illustrates the lengths to which solitary cruisers sometimes have to go in order to keep their minds focused. Oh, okay. Approaching the Azores on an eastward crossing of the Atlantic, about 800 miles short of the Portuguese coast, and after many days without sighting a sail, he saw another small craft heading the opposite way. It was a welcome opportunity to visit with a fellow cruiser, and the two boats set course to meet in the open sea side by side. The man in the other boat had been scrubbing the deck, which was partly covered by a foul-smelling, sticky yellow substance. "How did you get your boat so dirty?" asked my friend to break the ice. "Well, you see," shrugged the other, it's just a mess of rotten eggs." My friend admitted that it wasn't obvious to him how so many rotten eggs happened to get smeared over a boat in the middle of the ocean. "Well," said the man, "the fridge gave out and the eggs spoiled. There hasn't been any wind for days, and I was really getting bored. So I thought that instead of tossing the eggs overboard, I would break them over the deck so that I would get to clean them off afterwards. I let them set for a while so it would be harder to clean them off, but I didn't figure on them smelling so bad." In ordinary circumstances, solo sailors have plenty to keep their minds occupied. Their survival depends on being ever alert to the conditions of the boat and of the sea. It is this constant concentration on a workable goal that makes sailing so enjoyable. But when the doldrums set in, they might have to go to heroic lengths to find any challenge at all. In coping with, mm, you know what? Let's read about Susan Butcher footnote, which is very short for Susan Butcher. See The New Yorker, October 5th, 1987, page 34 and 35. Is coping with loneliness by letting unnecessary yet demanding rituals give shape to the mind any different from taking drugs or watching TV constantly? It could be argued that Dorothy and the other hermits are escaping from a reality just as effectively as addicts are. In both cases, psychic entropy is avoided by taking the mind off unpleasant thoughts and feelings. Yet, how one copes with solitude makes all the difference. If being alone is seen as a chance to accomplish goals that cannot be reached in the company of others, then instead of feeling lonely, a person will enjoy solitude and might be able to learn new skills in the process. On the other hand, if solitude is seen as a condition to be avoided at all costs instead of as a challenge, the person will panic and resort to distractions that cannot lead to higher levels of complexity. Breeding furry dogs and racing sleds through Arctic forests might seem like a rather primitive endeavor compared to the glamorous antics of playboys or cocaine users. Oops, sorry. Sorry about that. I took my eyes off the camera. Okay. Yet, in terms of psychic organization, the former is infinitely more complex than the latter. Lifestyles built on pleasure survive only in symbiosis with complex structures based on hard work and enjoyment. But when the culture is no longer able or willing to support unproductive hedonists, those addicted to pleasure, lacking skills and discipline, and therefore unable to fend for themselves, find themselves lost and helpless. This is not to imply that the only way to achieve control over consciousness is to move to Alaska and hunt moose. A person can master flow activities in almost any environment. A few will need to live in the wilderness or to spend long periods of time alone at sea. Most people would prefer to be surrounded by the reassuring hustle and bustle of human interaction. However, solitude is a problem that must be confronted whether one lives in southern Manhattan or the northern reaches of Alaska. Unless a person learns to enjoy it, much of life will be spent desperately trying to avoid its ill effects. Flow and the family. Some of the most intense and meaningful experiences in people's lives are the result of family relationships. Many successful men and women would second Lee Iacocca's statement. I've had a wonderful and successful career, but next to my family, it really hasn't mattered at all. Throughout history, people have been born into and have spent their entire lives in kinship groups. Families have varied greatly in size and composition, but everywhere individuals feel a special intimacy toward relatives with whom they interact more often than with people outside the family. Sociobiologists claim that this familial loyalty is proportional to the amount of genes that any two persons share. For instance, a brother and a sister will have half their genes in common, while two cousins only half as many again. In this scenario, siblings will, on the average, help each other out twice as much as cousins. Thus, the special feelings we have for our relatives are simply a mechanism designed to ensure that the gene's own kind will be preserved and replicated. There are certainly strong biological reasons for our having a particular attachment to relatives. No slowly maturing mammalian type sorry, no slowly maturing mammalian species could have survived without some built-in mechanism that made most adults feel responsible for their young, and the young feel dependent on the old. For that reason, the bond of the newborn human infant to its caretakers and vice versa is especially strong. But the actual kinds of relationships families have supported have been astonishingly diverse in various cultures and various times and at various times. For instance, whether marriage is polygamous or monogamous, or whether it is patrilineal or matrilineal, has a rather strong influence on the kind of daily experiences husbands, wives, and children have with one another. So do less obvious features of family structure, such as specific patterns of inheritance. The many small principalities into which Germany had been divided until about a century ago each had laws of inheritance that were based either on primogeniture primogeniture, where the oldest son was left the entire family estate, or on an equal division of the estate among all sons. Right. The daughters are left out. Which of these methods for transmitting property was adopted seems to have been due almost entirely to chance. Yet the choice had profound economic implications. Primogeniture led to concentration of capital in the lands that used this method, which in turn led to industrialization, whereas equal sharing led to the fragmentation of property and industrial underdevelopment. More pertinent to our story, the relationship between siblings in a culture that had adopted primogeniture must have been substantially different from one in which equal economic benefits accrued to all children. The feelings brothers and sisters had for one another, what they expected from one another, their reciprocal rights and responsibilities were to a large extent built into the particular form of the family system. As this example demonstrates, while genetic programming may predispose us to attachment to family members, the cultural context will have a great deal to do with the strength and direction of that attachment. Okay, let's read the footnotes back here about all these others interesting stuff. Okay, kinship groups. One of the most eloquent essays on the civilizing effect of the family on humankind is Levi Strauss's, oh, okay, great, that's French, Les structures élémentaires de la parenté. Sorry, butchered that. 1947, 1969. The sociobiological claim was first articulated by Hamilton, 1964, Trivers, 1972, Alexander, 1974, and E. O. Wilson, 1975. For later contributions to this topic are Solons, 1976, Alexander, 1979, Lupton and Wilson, 1983, and Boyd and Richardson, 1985. The attachment literature is now very large. The classics in the area include work by John Bowlby, 1969, and Mary D. Ainsworth et al., 1978. Primogeniture for the effects of inheritance laws in Europe. See Habakkuk, 1955. In France, see Pitts, 1964. In Austria and Germany, see Mitterauer and Sider, 1983. Alrighty then. Oh, let me try the light a little bit. Sorry. Huh. Okay. It's just look kind of weird where I was sitting. I hope that's okay. I hope you guys can see it. Okay. Um, all right, moving on. Because the family is our first and in many ways our most important social environment, quality of life depends to a large extent on how well a person succeeds in making the interaction with his or her relatives enjoyable. For no matter how strong the ties biology and culture have forged between family members, it is no secret that there is a great variety in how people feel about their relatives. Some families are warm and supportive, some are challenging and demanding. Others threaten the self of their members at every turn. Still others are just insufferably boring. The frequency of murder is much higher among family members than among unrelated people. Child abuse and incestuous sexual molestation, once thought to be rare deviations from the norm, apparently occur much more often than anyone had previously suspected. Oh, okay. Sorry, I lost my place there for a minute. In John Fisher Fletcher's words, those have most power to hurt us that we love. Mm. It is clear that the family can make one very happy or be an unbearable burden. Which one it will be depends to a great extent on how much psychic energy family members invest in the mutual relationship and especially in each other's goals. Every relationship requires a reorienting of attention, a repositioning of goals. When two people begin to go out together, they must accept certain constraints that each person alone did not have. Schedules have to be coordinated, plans modified. Even something as simple as a dinner date imposes compromises as to time, place, type of food, and so on. To some degree, the couple will have to respond with similar emotions to the stimuli they encounter. The relationship will probably not last long if a man loves a movie that a woman hates, and vice versa. When two people choose to focus their attention on each other, both will have to change their habits. As a result, the pattern of their consciousness will also have to change. Getting married requires a radical and permanent reorientation of attentional habits. When a child is added to the pair, both parents have to readapt again to accommodate the needs of the infant. Their sleep cycle must change. They will go out less often. The wife may give up her job. They may have to start saving for the child's education. All this can be very hard work, and it can also be very frustrating. If a person is unwilling to adjust personal goals when starting a relationship, then a lot of what subsequently happens in that relationship would produce disorder in the person's consciousness because novel patterns of interaction will conflict with old patterns of expectation. A bachelor may have on his list of priorities to drive a slick sports car and to spend a few weeks each winter in the Caribbean. Later, he decides to marry and have a child. As he realizes these latter goals, however, he discovers that they are incompatible with the prior ones. He can't afford a Maserati any longer, and the Bahamas are out of reach. Unless he revises the old goals, they will be frustrated, producing that sense of inner conflict known as psychic entropy. And if he changes goals, his self will change as a consequence. The self being the sum and organization of goals. In this manner, entering any relationship entails a transformation of the self. I don't know why it looks, I'm looking at the camera. It just looks dark. I don't know why that is. I turned the light on all the way up. I hope you guys can read it or see it. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Until a few decades ago, families tended to stay together because parents and children were forced to continue the relationship for extrinsic reasons. If were rare in the past, it wasn't because husbands and wives loved each other more in the old times, but because husbands needed someone to cook and keep house. Wives needed someone to bring home the bacon. And children needed both parents in order to eat, sleep, and get a start in the world. The family values that the elders spent so much effort in inculcating in the young were a reflection of this simple necessity, even when it was cloaked in religious and moral considerations. Of course, once family values were taught as being important, people learned to take them seriously and they helped keep families from disintegrating. All too often, however, the moral rules were seen as an outside imposition, an external constraint under which husbands, wives, and children chafed. In such cases, the family may have remained intact physically, but it was internally riven with conflicts and hatred. The current disintegration of the family is a result of the slow disappearance of external reasons for staying married. The increase in the divorce rate is probably more affected by changes in the labor market that have increased women's employment opportunities and by the diffusion of labor saving home appliances than it is by lessening of love or moral fiber. But the extrinsic reasons are not the only ones for staying married and for living together in families. There are great opportunities for joy and for growth that can only be experienced in family life. And these intrinsic rewards are no less present now than they were in the past. In fact, they were probably much more readily available today than they have been at any previous time. If the trend of traditional families keeping together mainly as a convenience is on the wane, the number of families that endure because their members enjoy each other may be increasing. Of course, because external forces are still much more powerful than internal ones, the net effect is likely to be a further fragmentation of family life for some time to come. But the families that do persevere will be in a better position to help their members develop a rich self than families held together against their will are able to do. There have been endless discussions about whether humans are naturally promiscuous, polygamous, or monogamous. And what I'd say monogamous. It depends on which where in your relationship uh, you are, in my opinion. But what do I know? I know nothing. And whether in terms of cultural evolution, monogamy is the highest form of family organization. It is important to realize that these questions deal only with the extrinsic conditions shaping marriage relationships. And on that count, the bottom line seems to be that marriages will take the form that most efficiently ensure survival. Even members of the same animal species will vary their patterns of relationship so as to adapt best in a given environment. For instance, the male long-billed marsh wren, Cystothoris palustris, is polygamous in Washington, where swamps vary in quality and females are attracted to those few males who have rich territories, leaving the less likely ones into a life of enforced bachelorhood. The same wrens are monogamous in Georgia, not so much because that state is part of the Bible Belt, but because the marshes all have roughly the same amount of food and cover. And so each male can attract a doting spouse to an equally comfortable nesting site. Okay, a footnote on monogamy. According to some sociobiologists, however, monogamy does have an absolute advantage over other mating combinations. If we assume that siblings help each other more in proportion to the genes they share, then children of monogamous marriages will help each other more because they share more genes than children whose parents are not the same. Thus, under selective pressures, children of monogamous couples will get more help and thus might survive more easily and reproduce proportionately more than children of polygamous couples growing up in a similar environment. Moving from the biological to the cultural level of explanation, it seems clear that other things being equal, stable monogamous couples are able to provide better psychological as well as financial resources for their children. Just from a strictly economic point of view, serial monogamy or the frequency of divorce seems to be an inefficient way of redistributing income and property. For the plight of one-parent families, economic and otherwise, see, for instance, Hetherington, 1979, McLanahan, 1988, and Tessman, 1978. Cystothoris palustris, that's the wren bird that they were talking about. The marital practices of the marsh wren are described in the Encyclopedia Britannica, 1985, volume 14, page 701. And let's read about Cicero. I know we haven't read that paragraph yet, but I'm going to go ahead and read the footnote. Cicero's quote about freedom was printed in my seventh grade school assignment diary. But despite several attempts, I have been unable to find its source. I sincerely hope it is not apocryphal. Apocryphal. Hmm, interesting. Okay. Yeah, we're coming up with Cicero very soon. So, um, the form the human family takes is a response to similar kinds of environmental pressures. In terms of extrinsic reasons, we are monogamous because in technological societies based on a money economy, time has proven this to be a more convenient arrangement. But the issue we have to confront as individuals is not whether humans are naturally monogamous or not, but whether we want to be a monogamous or not. And in answering that question, we need to weigh all the consequences of our choice. It is customary to think of marriage as the end of freedom, and some refer to their spouses as an old ball and chain. The notion of family life typically implies constraints, responsibilities that interfere with one's goals and freedom of action. Um, that means another word for that is growing up, being an adult. While this is true, especially when the marriage is one of convenience, what we tend to forget is that these rules and obligations are no different, in principle, than those rules that constrain behavior in a game. Like all rules, they exclude a wide range of possibilities so that we might concentrate fully on a selected set of options. Cicero once wrote that to be completely free, one must become a slave to a set of laws. In other words, accepting limitations is liberating. For example, by making up one's mind to invest psychic energy exclusively in a monogamous marriage, regardless of any problems, obstacles, and more attractive options that may come along later, one is freed of the constant pressure of trying to maximize emotional returns. Having made having made the commitment that an old-fashioned marriage demands and having made it willingly instead of being compelled by tradition, a person no longer needs to worry whether she has made the right choice or whether the grass might be greener somewhere else. As a result, a great deal of energy gets freed up for living instead of being spent on wondering about how to live. If one decides to accept the traditional form of the family, complete with a monogamous marriage and with a close involvement with children, with relatives, and with the community, it is important to consider beforehand how family life can be turned into a flow activity. Because if it is not, boredom and frustration will inevitably set in. And then the relationship is likely to break up unless there are strong external factors keeping it together. To provide flow, a family has to have a goal of it for its existence. Extrinsic reasons are not sufficient. It is not enough to feel that, well, everybody else is married. It is natural to have children. Or two can live as cheaply as one. These attitudes may encourage one to start a family and may even be strong enough to keep it going, but they cannot make family life enjoyable. Positive goals are necessary to focus the psychic energies of parents and children on common tasks. Some of these goals might be very general and long term, such as planning a particular lifestyle, to build an ideal home, to provide the best possible education for the children, or to implement a religious way of living in a modern secularized society. For such goals to result in interactions that will help increase the complexity of its members, the family must be both differentiated and integrated. Differentiation means that each person is encouraged to develop his or her unique traits, maximize personal skills, set individual goals. Integration, in contrast, guarantees that what happens to one person will affect all others. If a child is proud of what she accomplished in school, the rest of the family will pay attention and will be proud of her too. If the mother is tired and depressed, the family will try to help and cheer her up. In an integrated family, each person's goals matter to all others. Okay. A note on family complexity. Okay. Following the lead of Pagela, Pagels, 1988 definition of complexity. We could also say that a family whose interactions are more difficult to describe and whose future interactions are more difficult to predict on the basis of present knowledge is more complex than a family that is easier to describe and to predict. Such a measure would presumably give very similar results to a measure of complexity based on differentiation and integration. Hmm. In addition to long-term goals, it is imperative to have a constant supply of short-term objectives. This may include simple tasks like buying a new sofa, going on a picnic, planning for a vacation, or playing a game of Scrabble together on Sunday afternoon. Unless there are goals that the whole family is willing to share, it is almost impossible for its members to be physically together, let alone involved in an enjoyable joint activity. Here again, differentiation and integration are important. The common goal should reflect the goals of individual members as much as possible. If Rick wants to go to a motocross race and Erica would like to go to the aquarium, it should be possible for everyone to watch the race one weekend and then visit the aquarium the next. The beauty of such an arrangement is that Erica is likely to enjoy some of the aspects of bike racing, and Rick might actually get to appreciate looking at fish, even though neither would have discovered as much if left to his or her own prejudices. As with any other flow activity, family activity should also provide clear feedback. In this case, it is simply a matter of keeping open channels of communication. If a husband does not know what bothers his wife and vice versa, neither has the opportunity to reduce the inevitable tensions that will arise. In this context, it is worth stressing that entropy is the basic condition of group life, just as it is of personal experience. Unless the partners invest psychic energy in the relationship, conflicts are inevitable simply because each individual has goals that are to a certain extent divergent from those of all other members of the family. Without good lines of communication, the distortions will become amplified until the relationship falls apart. Feedback is also crucial to determine whether family goals are being achieved. My wife and I used to think that taking our children to the zoo on a Sunday every few months was a splendid educational activity and one that we would all enjoy. But when our oldest child turned 10, we stopped going because he had become seriously distressed with the idea of animals being confined in restricted spaces. Yep, that is true. That's why I don't go to the zoo. It's very sad. Very, very sad. It is a fact of life that sooner or later all children will express the opinion that common family activities are dumb. At this point, forcing them to do things together tends to be counterproductive. So most parents just give up and abandon their teenagers to the peer culture. The more fruitful, if more difficult, strategy is to find a new set of activities that will continue to keep the family group involved. The balancing of challenges and skills is another factor as necessary in enjoying social relationships in general, and family life in particular, as it is for any other flow activity. When a man and a woman are first attracted to each other, the opportunities for action are usually clear enough. Ever since the dawn of time, the most basic challenge for the swain has been, can I make her? For the maid, can I catch him? Usually and depending on the partner's level of skill, a host of more complex challenges are also perceived. To find out what sort of a person the other really is, what movies she likes, what he thinks about South Africa, and whether the encounter is likely to develop into a meaningful relationship. Then there are fun things to do together, places to visit, parties to go to and talk about afterward, and so on. With time, one gets to know the other person well, and the obvious challenges have been exhausted. All the usual gambits have been tried. The other person's reactions have become predictable. Sexual play has lost its first excitement. At this point, the relationship is in danger of becoming a boring routine that might be kept alive by mutual convenience, but is unlikely to provide further enjoyment or spark a new growth in complexity. The only way to restore flow to the relationship is by finding new challenges in it. These might involve steps as simple as varying the routines of eating, sleeping, or shopping. They might involve making an effort to talk together about new topics of conversation, visiting new places, making new friends. More than anything else, they involve paying attention to the partner's own complexity, getting to know her at deeper levels than were necessary in the earlier days of the relationship, supporting him with sympathy and compassion during the inevitable changes that the years bring. A complex relationship sooner or later faces the big question whether the two partners are ready to make a lifelong commitment. At that point, a whole new set of challenges presents itself. Raising a family together, getting involved in broader community affairs when the children have grown up, working alongside one another. Of course, these things cannot happen without extensive inputs of energy and time, but the payoff in terms of the quality of experience is usually more than worth it. The same need to constantly increase challenges and skills applies to one's relationship with children. During the course of infancy and early childhood, most parents spontaneously enjoy the unfolding of their baby's growth. The first smile, the first word, the first few steps, the first scribbles. Each of these quantum jumps in a child's skills becomes a joyful challenge to which parents respond by enriching the child's opportunities to act. From the cradle to the playpen to the playground to kindergarten, the parents keep adjusting the balance of challenges and skills between the child and her environment. But by early adolescence, many teenagers get to be too much to handle. What most parents do at that point is to politely ignore their children's lives, pretending that everything is all right, hoping against hope that it will be. All right, we're going to stop here for now. This is a long chapter. So we'll continue our reading next time with part 3. Anyways, I hope you're enjoying that. And in the meantime, I hope you guys all have a great day. And we'll see you next week. Okay, bye-bye now.